is not the same as a pipeline. That's the line that stopped me in this conversation. And if you've been a self-employed consultant for any length of time, you probably know exactly why it lands so hard. Because most of us were raised on a piece of advice that goes something like this: build relationships, do good work, and the business will come. Network, stay top of mind, have coffee with people, and eventually the right opportunities will land in your inbox. My guest today, Jonathan Spector, has decades of experience as a consultant and business development leader. He's worked inside global firms, led complex public sector engagements, and built a network that most consultants would envy. And about a year and a half ago, when he went fully independent, he discovered something that surprised him. A great network and a steady, full pipeline are two completely different things. In this episode, Jonathan and I get into the difference. We talk about why being strong at consulting is not the same skill as building a consulting business. We talk about the honest moment most self-employed consultants have, but rarely say out loud. The moment you wonder if you should just go back to a W-2 so you don't have to do the marketing and sales. And we talk about what it actually takes to build a pipeline of conversations with the right leaders instead of waiting for the work to come to you. My name is AJ Riedel. This is Thriving Through, the podcast where each week I have real conversations with self-employed consultants about what it really takes to build a profitable, sustainable, and fulfilling consulting practice. Let's dive right in. Welcome to this episode of Thriving Through. Today, my guest is Jonathan Spector. Jonathan, it's so great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, AJ. Looking forward to the conversation.
So the topic or the title of this podcast is called Thriving Through. What does thriving through mean to you?
For me, thriving through means doing meaningful, impactful work with people I enjoy working with on issues that matter. For me, it's about impact and purpose. So that's in the work. And there's some backstory if we touch on some of my career progression, talk about how that emerged, but that's really essentially what it is for me today.
Okay, impact and purpose. So I'll ask you, I'll ask you now. Are you thriving?
I am. From the delivery of the work that I'm in, I am thriving. And so I guess there are a couple of parts to that conversation. There's the work that I'm doing, and it's interesting actually even getting into this conversation where most of my conversations about my business are about the in the work versus on the business conversation, which we're having here today. So it's sort of shifting, between both parts of the conversation here. So is the business thriving? That's debatable in terms of consistency of income and longevity and pipeline and all those things. But from the nature of when I'm in the work, the conversation client meeting just prior to this and last night, that is, absolutely the work that I want to be doing. So the nature of the work, I am fulfilling that purpose. From the broader business, which is I suspect more of what we'll talk about here today, is it's a broader, more complex conversation.
Okay. So let's go back and and kind of look into the background. What was your path to becoming a self-employed consultant?
Sure. So I've always been in the consulting field. I started in technology consulting decades ago. Was with a systems integrator, defense contractor. Was a developer, or I guess a programmer, as we were called back then. Fairly early on in that work, I moved into the management side of the business. I really enjoyed the relationship building and the client-facing side of the work. And even actually through that work, there was a moment there. I was managing development teams, and I was at an event with some of my leadership and my client that was in defense and army client. And the client came up to myself and my leadership there and said, "Jonathan Spector, greatest salesman in the world. And it really took me aback because I'm a technology leader, managing these teams, or developing these systems, or in the Pentagon. And when I reflected back on that, I realized that, oh, we've been in this for years. They've been a steady client. And it's been a natural progression of talking about, well, what challenges are you having? Hey, I think I can help you with that. We can do that. We can help you with that. And that really, became my approach in that work, is this curiosity first, the solution-based selling, if you will. I was never about the pitch deck. And so anyway, it's an anecdotal story, but it kind of reflective of the rest of my career. I moved into senior roles there, worked in a couple different early stage companies, went through multiple acquisitions. I was with a software company for a while, acquired by IBM. It was in IBM doing heavy business development, most of it in government, public sector, government contracting. On the technology side, but that more into the pure management consulting world. And then eventually joined a company about a dozen or so years ago. It was an early stage company, was a partner there, growing that consulting practice as an executive in the company, and then doing delivery, managing teams, but also on the operations side. So I've kind of been on both sides of the business. And at one point there, about 5 years in, I intentionally shifted out of that executive role because I missed the client-facing work. And I built a portfolio there, and I also missed the collaboration and the mentoring of some of our more junior consultants. And through that is really where my passion for this impact work came up. I was doing work in leadership alignment and coalition building, complex public sector challenges, dealing with building a coalition on the opioid crisis and gun violence, a global convening of extreme heat, bringing public sector, private sector together and collaboration opportunities around crisis. And through building that portfolio and doing that work, I kind of found my juice. Like that's what I need to be doing. So I was doing it in the company and then shifted out about a year and a half or so ago to be doing more of that independently. So been inside, been outside, always in the consulting world, business development, all different aspects of that work.
Was there a specific defining moment about that year and a half ago when you said, I want to do this independent rather than for a company?
I don't know if it wasn't a particular moment. It was so at the same time while I was with this company, I was also starting to do some independent work with another colleague of mine, actually. We got in some really complex work with a large US city that was dealing with escalations of hate crimes, and they brought us down to essentially change the culture of the city. And so doing that type of work, and it wasn't, the company knew about it as work that they didn't want to do. We were doing this independently. And there was something about the nature of doing that work independently where in that work, when I'm doing client work, all I'm thinking about is the client and the needs and the work. When I'm in a business, then there's that, and there's also the business side and the operations. And it's not any company, you have that. And so while there's a part of that I liked of setting strategic direction and running a business, there was something about just the energy that I felt from just really being in the moment with, really complex problems that didn't have a black box solution, but really required deep curiosity, empathy, and the recognition of, I think we can actually make some meaningful change here and move the needle a little bit in some really complex areas. And so there was just something that struck a personal chord for me of, can I do more of this? And the timing also was much of my previous work was federal government related work. And so this was, going through the change of administration and cuts in funding. And so the timing was that environment was getting very challenging anyway, got actually a lot worse soon after I came out. But that was a part of my trajectory in my own business that emerged. So it was more of the nature of the work and wanting to be able to have the freedom to do it how and where and with whom I wanted to.
Okay, great. Tell us a story or two about the biggest challenges you faced building your practice and how you've overcome them.
For building my practice. So when I first was officially completely independent, I separated from my company. There was literally 2 weeks later, it was in August of 2023. And 2 weeks, I was going to take a little break. And 2 weeks later, I got a call from a former client who said, "Hey, I'm putting this thing together. It's around, convening around dealing with gun violence in Washington, D.C. and bring people together. And can you facilitate?" And so part of it was, I haven't even started and already the calls are coming in. Like, this is great. Made a few other calls over time and had work teed up over the next few months where I was a little concerned that I'd overcommitted. And
Mm.
most of it was actually federal government related work, whereas a lot of my previous portfolio had been in state and local government. And so this was going back into that federal space. And I thought there's some really interesting work and some work overseas and US aid in some other areas. And I was a little concerned going into 2024. And then with what happened within the administration and DOGE, and they cut funding, and it all fell off the table. Like every
Oh,
single, there were 5 or 6 different opportunities that were pretty close to being done. And I was trying to figure out schedules, and then it all completely just stopped immediately.
oh
So
man.
that was a moment. Welcome to
Yeah.
being on your own,
Oh
being
boy.
independent.
That
Um,
that that it sounds really like a brutal moment in time.
it
You
was.
had this stuff all lined up, and how did that impact you? Before we go on to talk about the next step,
Yeah.
how what was going through your mind when all of that dried up?
It was, I mean, it was both. I mean, initially it was frustrating. And it was, I guess to some degree a little sobering. There was a part of, well, nobody said it's going to be easy. And and it was new. It was a new experience because part of it is I'd always been in companies. So building business, growing business, closing business was always, you know, coming to me. There were rarely times where, particularly within a company that I couldn't identify something. And most of my work had been from once I can land in, I can expand and extend that work through relationships and others. So I knew that I was thinking there's a foundation here and that's going to carry me for quite a long time. So there was a lot of that in there. And at the same time, I was also increasingly getting myself engaged and leaning into the world of AI. And not to build solutions and technology solutions, but it was coming up more in my conversations around strategy and execution. And so it became an opportunity to say, let me really figure out my own point of view here and how might this incorporate into my work and how this could be a wedge into doing some of the core work that I did. So I turned it into an opportunity for learning. And I mean, I was also fortunate that I wasn't in a position of I've got to pay the electric bill next month and I need to make X amount of money. So I had some space to be able to take a breath and do that. So I was fortunate that having had, a career of decades, that there was some cushion there that I could take a little bit of time and take a little bit of chance there. But it was certainly a new experience for me.
So, so you had this. What it sounds like is you had this really amazing amount of initial success when you let people know that in your world that you were doing this, and then all of a sudden that all and it was all pretty easy, and then it all started just like that dried up. And what I like about your story is that you didn't well, maybe you can't. I mean, there probably may have been some panic, certainly not financially, because you did have a cushion there. But what I really like is that you looked at emerging trends, meaning this juggernaut called AI, and you in that time that you had, you were able to really focus on how can I kind of stay ahead of this.
And I would say there's a yes end in there where as I continued on, starting to tap my network. And I have a pretty significant network of people just from the decades of doing the work, both from the client side, but also other people that I've, worked with in the industry and who at, all that from the Deloittes and Accentures and others to smaller companies and have started companies. And I was also straddling the fence there around, do I want to go back inside somewhere or do I want to stay independent? And I absolutely did not want to go back inside, particularly to a large company. That was a pretty hard no. I'm not interested in doing that. And I want to, stay in this independent world. But the other part of it, and we can talk more about that, but the other part of it is that realizing that even through these conversations that a network is not the same thing as a pipeline. And while I had the relationships and had some really great reconnection conversations with people that I hadn't seen in a while, and most of those from the business side was looking those that were inside companies as a partnership. Is there a 1099 opportunity, where I can come in and I can add value in a team or I've got unique skills or capabilities. So that's where a lot of that was. Some of that actually resulted in some referrals, but that was having a big network was not, equating to, and now I've got a pipeline. And that breadth can feel good and also to some degree be a marketing liability, I guess because it feels great to have all these contacts. And the reality was, particularly in the environment that we were in, like I said, most of my world has been in public sector work, but even in the private sector where I've done work and over the years and I've done increasingly, the whole world was, and for my type of work, was kind of taking a pause and saying, we're trying to figure out which direction the world is going right now. And there wasn't a whole lot of energy that I was experiencing for the work that I was doing. And that brought up another, I think, realization for me as I started to question a little bit, through the months after that of, so am I not as good as, what I thought I was? And then got back into some of the work and realized the distinction between being strong, being powerful and good in consulting is not the same as building a consulting business, and really getting clear about that line. I think I had that blurred for a long time. If I'm really good, then the work is going to come. Not from an arrogant standpoint. It had always sort of happened that way, that work led to other, work led to other. And to be in a situation where I was starting from zero, it had been a long time since there wasn't a base that I was growing from. So there were a lot of those moments, I think, along the way over, last year.
You said something really important. A network doesn't equate to a full pipeline.
Mhm.
And you talked, I think that is so important for people listening to this podcast to understand, because I talk to so many consultants who rely pretty exclusively on networking, and it sounds like you were kind of there, and they don't, and then the networking doesn't, when if you build it, they will come. That was Field of Dreams, the movie. It isn't reality. So tell me a little bit more about, for you, what is the difference between the network and the pipeline?
And I chuckled when you said that with the network and the networking. There's a joke I've had with, with my wife about one of the things that I never loved doing was sort of the general networking event. And there's a lot of value, and I advise people to get involved. And I was involved in some for a while, but I'm much more interested in, being active than going to a breakfast or going to happy hour. And we joke about my network when I have to go to one of these, voices of, hey, how are you? Hey, good to see you. And everybody's there just like looking for business. And it just
Right.
was not my, and some people thrive and love that. And that's great. I was never going to build my business from that. I'm much more interested in introduced to someone or a focused conversation and coming in from a curiosity and a more in-depth discussion. And it was always relationship based. And that was just never my game. So your question around, that not being the same, I think that there's, the network is powerful and valuable in terms of the relationships are there. And if they're genuine relationships, then you can contact somebody that you haven't seen in years. And because there was something, substantial there. And I think the trick was figuring out, how do I use the network and not feel like I'm using the network? But the reality of the world is everything is going to come from relationships. I teach my kids that always establish relationships. And that's where, my friends' kids who contact me about, I want to learn about consulting. And so it's going to come from, those connections, that network. And it's also going to take, a recognition of time. There's the thousand cups of coffee, or folks in sales and planting seeds everywhere, and you don't know where they're going to grow, but you've got to keep doing the work. And so I think there's that recognition or understanding of what is your expectation of the network. And my sense is that if you expect it to deliver work, then that's going to be really hard. And if you're using it to let people know what you're doing and be genuine about the relationships and always coming in with offering something, and that's something that I've always done. I see something, hey, I thought of you, I saw this, I think this is relevant to something you're doing. That's a way to, so maintaining that network and letting people know what you're doing is important. And there's some nuance in terms of, how aggressive people are in terms of, asking for business or asking for referral. And I don't know that I've necessarily figured it out. I just know that it's got to feel genuine for me, or that's gonna feel bad and also not work. I
Right.
don't know if that made sense. I was
It,
going to go into different
yes,
spirals there, but that's,
it
right.
does. I want to mention something that we talked about in our pre-interview that is worth exploring. You were candid about toying with the idea of going back to a W-2,
Mhm.
not because of financial pressure, because you have some financial cushion,
Mhm.
but because it would let you just do the work without having to build the business. And that's kind of what we were talking about here. Just a broad network does not mean that you're going to automatically have a business from it.
Mhm.
That a lot of consultants feel that, but don't say it out loud. I
Mhm.
just want to do the work. I don't want to have to do the marketing and sales. Would you be comfortable going there and talking a little bit more about that train of thought?
Mhm.
Where you're going with that, if anyway, if anywhere.
Sure. And I think there are a lot of dimensions to it. First, when this comes out and my wife listens, she'll be like, yes, is there steady income that's coming? So she'll have one position on this. So there are a few pieces. And in fact, there was a company that I spoke with that had contacted me. This is maybe a month ago. And what the founder had said outright was, we have the business. We've got more. Actually, what I need are some senior people that can help with the designing and delivery. And there's a part of that was, well, that's refreshing and that's
Mhm.
exciting because, like I said up front, the thriving is it's being in the work and it's mentoring and working with teams. So there, and the irony is part two is I spent a lot of my career in business development. So positioning, pursuing, capture, all of that, I have lots of experience in, and I really enjoyed it. Different from the base of I think within a company than doing it independently. And so that's what's been interesting for me is so for the company itself, for the going inside, there's the doing the work, the consistency of it, not needing to think about how more is going to be, coming in. And then there's also the team element. There is something for me, both in working in teams as well as I really enjoy growing a business and being part of. So I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth to some degree here. We're being part of an executive team that I did for a lot of years, and being at the table in my last early stage company when we were a dozen people every Monday, having a conversation with magnets on a whiteboard about our pipeline and saying, okay, if these things don't happen, we have a 90-day cliff and we're out of business. And we went through a year and a half, 2 years of that. And then the conversations of if we actually win this, we don't have the people. But if we hire and we don't win, we can't pay them. So there's something fun is an interesting word, but there's something, interesting, challenging, exciting about that environment that I really enjoy of being part of growing a business. So there's that element of it, which I walked away from my last company because I want to get back into the delivery side and the consulting side, and being part of the team. And so the flip side is when I'm in the work that I'm in right now, like I said earlier, the all I think about is the work and the impact and the people and how I design and prepare for the next meeting. And so that's really exciting is to, be true to this is actually the work that I want to be doing. And I don't necessarily, and a lot of it is very episodic. So I don't necessarily have, I have zero backlog for 2027. Where are we? 2026, 2027. And so that means finding that. Where is it going to come from my current work? And so while I don't have the part of when you're in a company, I mentioned you've got to focus on the business itself. but you kind of do on your own anyway. And so I've got a lot of back and forth. I don't know where I land in that. If the right amazing opportunity inside a company emerged and it checked lots of the boxes for me and I could feel good about that, I've always been, I've never turned down a conversation, let's put it that way, around anything, which has been great. And it also, is hard to stay focused, with that. But I always want to hear what's happening, what's interesting out there. And so I don't have a clear, firm stance of, nope, this is my path and I'm 100% sticking with it. I know what my preference is. And there are a lot of interesting things that are happening in the world of business today. Particularly you mentioned AI. I've met with some founders who are building businesses, and do I want to get involved in something like that? Like there's kind of reading how I feel internally, and is this the right thing? I'm at the stage of my career where I want to feel good about what I'm doing and see some meaning in the work and balance with, overall quality of life. And so all those things come into play. And probably any of your audience that are executive coaches are ready to contact me and say, I'm going to help you figure this out. So I'm still very much in that messy middle of, there are lots of interesting things. I can't sit here and say it's all completely steady and consistent right now. And I know what kind of work I enjoy doing.
And it sounds like there's kind of an ongoing tension between you really like the independent side of it, but there are things about being in an organization and having a team to work with and having, those Monday morning conversations that you can't necessarily get independently. And there's that
Right.
kind of tension. Let me ask
Yeah.
you a question.
Yeah.
Is
No, to that,
part
I had just a final
okay?
comment on that. You just reminded me of, I had a conversation with a partner at a private equity firm who was talking about different things with his portfolio and my experiences, and he was asking questions. And he said, the problem is that you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And I feel that a lot. Like there are a lot of things that are interesting, and finding that focus is something that I regularly wrestle with.
And is that finding the focus? Is it coming from, is there any concern? I hear this with consultants of if I narrow down, I'll miss opportunities. When, in reality, narrowing down when you're independent is almost a necessity
Mhm.
because otherwise you're trying to be everything to everyone, which means you're nothing to anyone. Is
Right.
there anything of that, or is it just that there are so many interesting things to look at?
I think there are a few pieces. And what I'm hearing in that, AJ, is, am I building a practice or just accepting work? And
Oh,
that's one
I like
element,
that take.
of it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
There's the focus piece. And so traditionally in my coaching work, I gave this advice to mention my wife, who was a landscape designer, and we had a walk on the beach years ago around doing design work, and but she really wanted to do container design and high end, developing. And I said the way to go is focus, but it's a limiting thing. And then she built a business that did very well. And so I get that is the way to go. For me, I'm not sure exactly what I should might not be the right, where I really would want to focus. And yes, I'm concerned about closing doors to other opportunities. If I could just sit all day and learn and play with AI tools and listen to podcasts and just absorb and be learning and having my hands in lots of different things, there's something that would be fun about that. So I don't want to miss opportunities for doing interesting things. And I recognize that doing a little bit, again, this is advice that I give to CEOs and executive teams is, don't do a little bit about a lot of things, do everything about the fewest, most critical. So I know, what works and I know it's successful and I've seen it play out in companies for decades. And I haven't got myself there yet.
So you know it intellectually,
Yeah.
and it's advice you give others, but it sounds like in your mind there's a a little voice that's saying, but
Yeah.
so what is keeping you from taking your own advice?
I don't know if it's a but or it's an end. There's the
Okay.
and there are these other things. I haven't yet figured out what is that. It's, I think it's more than the path. It's what is the work required to develop that business. And so even the building of the business, the building of the pipeline, what will it take? And what am I comfortable doing, or what will yield success? So it's a few things that come into play there. What I'm not interested in is figuring out my LinkedIn marketing posting campaign. There are people that do that phenomenally well and generate and build their business there. And I'm active to some degree in waves on LinkedIn, and I see an awful lot, and I just don't want to feel like another person posting my thoughts that sound like everybody else's. And while I've got my own point of view and things, there's a little bit of a to what end am I doing that? And so I know that's not the only way to market, but it's certainly a common way today. And so part of it is figuring out what is that path to actually developing business. If my current work of where I have some existing business today and some things that have started up over the last month or so, then leads to continued business in steady state, that would be good. I would be happy with that. It's the how do I get into a continuous run of business? So it's the building the pipeline, it's the building the closed business that I haven't figured out. And there's probably a little chicken and egg in there of, well, figure out exactly what you want to do and then figure out who is your ICP, and then back into what should your messaging be and how do you focus. And I haven't done a great job of really driving down any one of those paths.
You mentioned that in your work, you did a lot of business development. It's different when you're doing it for a company and doing it for yourself. Have you found that?
For sure. For sure.
What is it that makes it different?
Well, part of it is just the nature of, most of the business development that I did was in with public sector clients, so federal government, state and local clients. So that whole process of the RFIs, the RFPs, how to position, how to capture, how to pursue the proposal, all of that. The reality is that most of that requires an infrastructure behind you for qualifying opportunities, for positioning, for getting contract vehicles. So there's a whole world there that I lived in and knew really well. And some of what I've taken from that in terms of building partnerships is some of the work that I'm now waiting on, working as 1099 with companies. But I'm not, but to do that, it's just not realistic on my own. And I'm not, by the way, I'm an independent contractor, so I'm not looking at building a business and hiring people. I'm really staying independent. So I've done some advising actually with businesses on how to set up their business development engine and how to do that work. And and as I say that, I actually just won a competitive contract that I did bid on. And there's another that with a former partner of mine that we're waiting on award for. So it's a painful process to go through that for public sector, but it's just not realistic. And I know some people who have small businesses, and they regularly they're watching the RFIs and they're watching the RFPs and they're responding. And it's a different game of doing a lot of the upfront business development and establishing relationships there. And it's just not the world that I want to be in right now. I do on the delivery side for sure, but the front end of that I did for a long time, did it very successfully, and on my own, it's just not what's gonna drive me.
So you're talking about chasing or keeping monitoring RFIs and
And RFP, yeah,
RFP? What
RFPs,
is an
yeah,
RFI?
request for information. So
Oh,
that's the
oh,
worst. Where
okay.
first they'll put out So there's no even a contract. It's before we do an RFP, we're going to put this out, and I call it it's free consulting to the government. Here's what we're thinking about. Tell us how we should be thinking about it, and tell us, would you bid on this? And so you're giving them the criteria that then becomes an RFP. And the other thing in that world is, my mantra was, for a company was you need to do more positioning and less chasing. If you see an RFP and you didn't know about it, then you're already too late.
Mm-hmm.
So don't even waste the time, pursuing. So that's a whole different type of work to really establish. If you want to be in that game, you're probably 18 to 24 months out from actually winning something because of getting in the game, establishing the relationships, and understand what's coming, so that you're ready. An RFP is coming out, you've positioned for it, and so do a whole podcast on how to pursue those opportunities. So, and that was fun. Like that was an exciting time. I really enjoyed that, but that's not practical for that would be an either or. Or if I'm going to do that, I'm going to go in a company and go
Mm-hmm.
be their business development lead for that.
But when you look at being independent, that is not a business development strategy that is of interest to you.
Not for the private sector. I'm sorry, not for the public sector. For private sector, there's a reality of you do need to, like this one I just won was a competitive, but I also was positioned for it. I talked to the CEO and established a relationship, and then their executive board decided we need to put this out competitively, and it was out in Texas, across the country. And so I thought my odds are not very high, but got down selected and did a presentation to the board, and they got further down selected, and they checked references and got awarded. So it worked. We won it, but that was easier than the state one that I bid on with another colleague of mine. That was a 70-page proposal, and for two independents, that was a pretty heavy lift. It'd be a nice contract to win, and we'll hopefully know soon. But to do that as a regular thing is just not what I'm interested in doing.
Right. So do you know what you're interested in doing instead?
In terms of the work, or
Uh,
in terms of
in
the
terms of
the chase?
finding the work, the chase,
Right, right.
the business development.
Right. In the perfect world, it's there, from my network, from referrals, I love the conversations. So I'm not saying hand me a contract, but, to be in the conversation of here's what I'm dealing with, and, my questions around what are you trying to do and what's making that hard, and listening and talking about here's how I could help you do that. I could have those conversations. I love that. So it's getting to that conversation. It's not handing me the work, but let me get the conversation, with the leader that is wrestling with something, or trying to make a pivot in their business, or trying to explore what their AI adoption path is, or whatever that is. So that's the part that I haven't invested a lot of energy or focus is, so how do I build that pipeline of conversations to have with
Mhm.
leaders?
Right. Yeah. Because you have to have you have to find the person to have the conversation with, get them
Right.
interested in having a conversation with you before you're able to have those conversations. And that's sounds like you haven't built that up yet
I've not.
and not quite sure.
Not consistently anyway.
Okay. And are you a little uncertain as to how to do that? Or do you know?
I have thoughts, or I mean, I have ideas of ways that I'm doing it, and some of it has happened organically. So, for example, over the next month, I am speaking at a conference on leading through AI, and that'll be an audience of potential clients that are in there. Through somebody that saw me do some of this work somewhere else, said, "Hey, can you come? This is a really important message for leaders." There's another breakfast club, I think they call it, of CEOs and founders of small, medium-sized businesses. I'm facilitating a 2-hour conversation locally. They've been invited to. Again, it's this AI has become sort of a wedge for me to get in. Not talking about tools and technology, but as a leader, I have this sort of foundational message of your job as a leader doesn't change, but how work gets done is changing, and you need to understand what that means. So that's how I'm coming into that, which ultimately leads to the alignment work, the strategic planning, and the core work that I do. So I'm doing things like that are, that potentially will lead to business. I did a webinar for an organization that I've done some support work with an emergency management space, and 175 people attended. So that's how I am, and that's what I really enjoy. Is I love teaching. I love being in the conversations. So if I can, find ways to do it that way, as opposed to cold reach out to people that I am pitching a message to, I would do that. And it's probably the next path of figuring out a smart strategic way of reaching out to CEOs and the senior leaders. But to be in front of an audience and establish rapport and establish relationship, if that can lead to business, then that would be great. And we'll see.
Okay. This may be, well, where do you see your practice in the next 3 to 5 years?
Over the next 3 to 5 weeks.
That's why I was going to preface it and say this may
Right.
be a hard question to answer.
It is our question to answer, where I don't have, again, the guy who's leading organizations through vision and strategy, and let's talk about where you're going to be in 3 years. I don't have a clear picture of, I have not done that work to say, this is where I'm going to be in 3 years. And again, maybe it's the, cobbler children have no shoes, where the core of my work is doing future back thinking. Let's sit in a place in the future and look back and say, what do we do to get there? I have very much been doing, present forward, and I think about it, and you triggered this for me earlier about, so am I actually building something or just accepting what's coming in? And right now it's very opportunistic, still within the spaces that I want to be in. But it is very much, from where I sit now going forward. And so if I put myself there, it's working independently in the work, having a comfortable, steady income. It doesn't have to be steady, but over the course of a year, a comfortable income that affords us the lifestyle we want to lead, with the flexibility of being in the work that I want to be in and doing this as meaningful work. And my wife would say, and if you could get to exotic places where I can go with you, that would be a nice part of it too.
Pay travel that's paid for by projects.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
cool. Well, as we reach the end of our time for the podcast, I have a couple closing questions.
Sure.
What's one book, podcast, or resource that's been invaluable to your consulting practice so far?
Wow. One, I'm not sure I could do one. I mean, I've been shaped by decades of experiences, peers, mentors, frameworks, lots of reading, newsletters. I probably, subscribe to 50 different podcasts, including yours. And in areas around everything from leadership to AI, health, fitness, personal growth. It's pretty balanced. There are statements that have stuck with me. I had a mentor early on in my career when I really was shifting into more of the management consulting type work, and Ruth Wagner, and she said, we were in a really complex scenario. We were at a 2-day session with an Army client, and after the first day, she said, this is not going to work. And we stayed up till 3 a.m, sitting on the team of us on the hotel room floor, redesigning something we've been done for months. And one of her comments in the nature of this type of work was, everything is data. And that was a really powerful comment for me, of any situation, of not judging it, just accepting it as data. There's a funny one, there's a comment from a former client of mine, Pete Ron, who was the Secretary of Transportation in the state of Maryland, was a long-term client. And one of my favorite quotes from him was, policies and procedures are the scar tissue of previous transgressions. Policies and procedures are scar tissue, meaning somebody got their brother-in-law hired 10 years ago, and we put all of these things in place to make sure that that never happens again. So I love that, particularly doing a lot of work in public sector. A book that I return to regularly personally is Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. It really helps keep me grounded. And, when you're building something, or it's actually on my nightstand, now, for about focus and sustained attention and staying curious and being grounded. Like that balance for me has been important. So I don't know that I could name just one,
Well, you've given us
but
some
there's a
good
book.
ones and some good quotes.
Yeah.
And this last question, the most important question, how can listeners connect with you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
So the best way is LinkedIn. As much as I demeaned it earlier, I do have an active LinkedIn profile, and I've got a website. It's Converge SP, so Converge Strategic Partners.com. That's a fairly basic website. I don't actively update it every couple of weeks, but it's got the essence of the nature of the work that I do and some of my background and some of the client experiences that I've had. So those are the best, and DMing me directly through LinkedIn is always a good way. I do keep up with those, and through email, I'm responsive to emails. Like a lot of folks in the world, that's been an interesting experience with me, is seeing and hearing stories of people that are talking about working with very senior people and that they have relationships with, and the crickets. Like maybe people are just overwhelmed with email, but I don't know, separate conversation there. But I'm responsive on email. So email, LinkedIn, website, it all works.
Okay. And for those of you listening or watching, the links will be in the show notes to the Jonathan's LinkedIn profile and also to his website. Well, Jonathan, thank you. This has been a great conversation. And for those of you listening or watching, until next time, keep thriving through. So here's what I want you to take away from my conversation with Jonathan. A network is not a pipeline. Being good at the work is not the same as building a business. And being opportunistic, taking what comes in, is not the same as building a practice. If any of that hit home, you're not alone. This hits home for almost every self-employed consultant I talk to. The honest truth is that most of us were never taught how to build a systematic way to generate qualified conversations with the right leaders. And no amount of networking, posting, or hoping is going to fix that on its own. Before I let you go, if you're doing solid work but your income doesn't show it, I want to offer you something. It's called a revenue diagnosis call. Before we meet, you'll take the consultant marketing scorecard, a 15-minute online assessment that pinpoints exactly where your business development system is breaking down. Then on our 60-minute call, I'll tell you whether you have a lead generation problem, a nurturing problem, or a conversion problem, and which one is costing you the most money right now. This isn't coaching. This is a diagnosis. If you're under 100K in annual revenue and you know that you should be at least 150K or more, this call is for you. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, keep thriving through.